Okay, and we'd once again like to thank MFABC as the keynote sponsor. Now let's get underway with our keynote. Rick Mercer chronicles, satirizes, and ultimately celebrates all that is great about this country. A #1 best-selling author, Governor General Award winner, and lifetime artistic achievement, and Canada's unofficial opposition, Mercer is our most popular comic, a political satirist who knows exactly what matters to regular Canadians and what makes them laugh. Rick Mercer's top-rated and award-winning CBC show, The Rick Mercer Report, routinely trampled even its American competitors in the ratings. The show featured Rick Mercer's trademark rants, satirical newscasts, commercial parodies, and comic encounters with famous Canadians talking about Canada. More than any other Canadian, or journalist for that matter, he talks to Canadian newsmakers with a refreshing candor and is uniquely able to spin top hilarity from the people and the things deeply embedded in the national consciousness. Born in St. John's, Newfoundland, Mercer has won over 25 Gemini Awards for his top-rated CBC series, The Rick Mercer Report, Made in Canada, and this hour has 22 minutes. Interviewing Rick today will be Ms. Jody Vance. Ms. Vance is born and raised Vancouverite who spent 30 years in both local and national broadcast media. The first woman in the history of Canadian television to host her own sports show in prime time. Since 2011, she's been working both in TV and radio covering news and current affairs. Ms. Vance is currently a freelance Canadian correspondent for Al Jazeera Media Network. She's a proud mom and crazy dog lady, and is delighted to host today's keynote address for the 2021 convention. Over to you, Jody and Rick.
Thank you so much, Craig. And yes, I do fully endorse the crazy dog lady portion of that intro. Rick, I am absolutely honored to be here with you. You and I have had the opportunity to have a little bit of a pre-chat, and we have agreed on where we start here. And I'm going to start with the simplest possible interviewer's question.
Did we agree? Did we agree? I don't. Okay, let's go. Let's go.
How are you?
I'm good.
Are you good?
I'm good. I have no complaints, and I wouldn't complain because, obviously these are such strange times, and they're so strange that not a single person has appeared in public in 18 months without saying these are strange times. But I've been very fortunate. I have a house that I'm comfortable in, and I have no complaints. It's been weird, but no complaints.
It has been weird. We're going to get into the weirdness of politics and dive deep into where we're headed in the next couple of days with the federal election. I know everybody watching right now is very much looking forward to your take on it, your RMR take on the federal election. But before we get there, I wanted to point out that your resume, Craig just laid out an unbelievable resume, the highlights there, but you have a pretty significant sort of, I guess, footnote from 3 decades ago where the UBCM is concerned?
Yes, the UBCM was basically my first job. My first real job off the stage. I started out in comedy, and then I ended up with this one-man show. And the one-man show was called Show Me the Button, I'll Push It, or Charles Lynch Must Die. And it was essentially about the Meech Lake Accord. Now, who would write a play about the Meech Lake Accord? I have no idea, but I did. And the show became a bit of a hit, and I toured it around the country. And someone at the Union of British Columbia Municipalities came to see the show, and I got hired to come and give a keynote. And I had never even had anyone put me on a plane before. And I had never addressed a conference before. And it was a huge, the conference was in Victoria, British Columbia. And it was just a huge game changer for me. It opened my eyes to a whole other world. And it was a big leg up. And also I was broke. I was dead broke. And it was a great gig. So I thank them. And yes, now we're bookending the entire experience.
Here we go, full circle. There are going to be opportunities for those who are watching. We've got thousands of people actually watching this, and we'll be able to ask you questions in the last 15 minutes of the hour we have together. But being the host, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask a question that I think many would shout in my ear if they could before we get into the politics and such. There was a flurry on Twitter about your future. and whether or not that you might consider, Rick, being the next host of Jeopardy.
Well, Twitter is the kind of thing. Someone very kindly suggested that a Canadian should take over Jeopardy. And of course, there was a bit of a brouhaha that's still not over about who would be the next Jeopardy host. And I was kindly suggested, and a number of people kindly retweeted it. And then, of course, my mother said, "I heard you might do Jeopardy. Do you want to do Jeopardy?" And I was like, no, there's a difference, Mom, between you heard I was doing, oh, no, I got a couple of calls. They said you're going to host Jeopardy. And I said, no. Although, many years ago, I was offered, I never went to the States, and I certainly don't criticize anyone who goes to the States to work because it's the biggest entertainment market in the English language. But I was fortunate. I never had to go down there, but I did get a call. Would I host The Weakest Link? Do you remember that show way back when?
I remember that.
And it was a huge hit, but then they went to daytime and they felt they needed someone who was non-American, who could make fun of the American school system. That's what they wanted. And talking to Americans was making a lot of noise in the States at the time. So they offered it to me, and it was one of the toughest decisions in my life because it was money is what it was.
Yeah.
But I had just launched a sitcom. I had just done 6 episodes. I didn't know if it was going to work or not, but I was the writer. I was the star. It was a Canadian show. It was creatively what I wanted to do my entire life. And The Weakest Link was not, but it was, Hollywood and stuff. And I chose not to do it. And I never regretted it, but I've often thought what would have happened had I gone down there. I mean, I could have, crashed and burned within a couple of minutes. Who knows? But I've been fortunate I've never had to do that. But my God, yes, Jeopardy, sure.
Great. Let's start the rumor. Everybody tweet right now. Hashtag Rick Mercer for Jeopardy. Let's do this. We can do. I think you're perfect for it. I really, really do.
Well, can I do it from my cabin in Newfoundland? That'll be my first question.
No, it has to be an answer. It has to be an answer in the form of a question. No.
Right.
Okay, let's get to what we all know is iconic. RMR, Rick Mercer Report. Do you miss it as much as we miss it, Rick Mercer?
I do. You know what I miss is the travel. And the show evolved into a show where I would travel to at least 2 places in the country every week. And so it was nonstop travel in Canada. I really viewed the entire country as my hometown. I would think of, British Columbia as like the West End of town. And people would say, oh, do you go to BC often? I'd say, not a heck of a lot, probably 8 times a year. And, I was in every province at least 8 times a year. And I met a lot of people, and I maintained relationships for 15 years as a result. And now, of course, you can't do that anyway, but I miss that very much. And I miss what I was most proud of is that we would go to a small town. We would find people that you would probably never on television before, never would be on television again. And they trusted us, and I would put them on TV in a way that they looked like rock stars. And I love doing that. And I'm always so proud when people say, oh, I went swimming with seals in Gas Bay because I saw you do it. Or, I went to Kamloops because I saw you were there. And so I miss that part. The politics part, I kind of don't mind having stepped away from the opinion business right now. Not that I don't think there should be opinion out there, but it's even in the couple of years or 18 months since I've stepped away from it, things have gotten so much more vitriolic. And I noticed that last going off. I always had people who contacted me when I would do a rant or an opinion piece who would often say, you're full of it, or I don't like what you're saying. But in the last little while, people would say, you can't say that, you shouldn't say that. And then sometimes they would threaten you. And I was never personally concerned about that, but there was this change in tone. I never got threats in the first 10 or 12 years of the show ever. And then people would go to that place. And right now during this election, you see there is this palatable anger, and you see these protests that are happening. And, some people say, oh, it's anti-vaxxers or it's whatever, but I can guarantee you go to those protests. And I would say, if you grab 15 people, 15 of those people have very little in common as to why they're actually there. The thing they have in common is they're incredibly angry, and they don't know how else to get it off their chest other than to show up at these rallies and literally throw rocks or gravel and scream obscenities at either a hospital or a prime minister or a leader. It's unlike anything we've ever seen. So I'm not, I don't miss it completely. And that's one of the reasons why.
What a phenomenal answer. And it leads us to the next subject matter, which is the anger that we are seeing with regard to politics, not just here in Canada, but all over. But let's dial in to what we're seeing here. I mean, gravel being thrown at leaders and eggs smashed over a head. It feels un-Canadian, or is it?
I don't know, but what I worry about is, like, this is a very small minority of people, but I'm not going to suggest like a hug a thug reaction. But what I am worried about is these people. They know they're outliers. They know they're the minority. They're out there screaming and yelling in a very angry way. And the rest of us, by and large, are treating them with total disdain. We are totally looking down on them. We think they're just with total disdain. And in many ways, they deserve it. Because most of us in our heart of hearts think that's just not the way you behave. And especially, never mind throwing gravel at the prime minister, but protesting at hospitals and those kinds of things. We find it deplorable, but we run into the danger of, well, using the word deplorable like Hillary Clinton did when she called certain people deplorables. And that just doesn't help. And I wonder how we're going to get those people back with the program. Get them to a place where they're not so angry that they will picket a hospital or they'll scream and yell obscenities at children. So that worries me, how we're going to deal with this, because they're not a real concern. They're not going to flip this election one way or the other. But that's kind of what I'm concerned about.
Okay, so is it frustration? Is it exhaustion? Is it a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, COVID-19, a global pandemic? None of us could have imagined these last 18, 20 months. Now, none of us could. And the fact that this 2 years since the last election, the last federal election, feels like 5.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking about that. I'm sure we'll talk about the timing of this election. And, all governments will get thrown out eventually when they're past their best before date. In Ontario, when the Liberals went down, they had been in power for so long provincially, it didn't matter what they were going to do. It was time for them to go. That was just, the writing was on the wall. And I think the Liberals federally, when they were calculating whether or not to have this election, they didn't feel like they had reached that point federally. But the difference is, on paper, they mightn't have reached that point. But like you just said, the last 18 months, 2 years, felt like 5 years. So everyone's concept of time is completely warped. And people might be ready for a change where they normally wouldn't after this time period. It's something that no one can factor in because no one knows how everyone is reacting to this pandemic. But certainly I feel like the last 2 years have been 5. I'm sure most people do.
Indeed. And it is that unprecedented times piece of this. How do you imagine if Rick Mercer had been a fly on the wall in the office, in the boardroom, in the back, the prime minister's office, when the decision was made that now is the time, because that has been the target of all other leaders at federal Liberal leader Justin Trudeau, now that we are in this 36-day election that wraps up on Monday?
I would love to be a fly on the wall, but I can guarantee you, they were thinking things like, we're number 1 now in vaccinations in Canada. And look, we have tape of Aaron O'Toole and Jagmeet Singh saying, we're falling down on the job and we're the worst in the world. And in fact, we're the best in the world. And we've handled the pandemic well. And most Canadians think we've handled the pandemic well. So if most Canadians think we've done a good job of handling the pandemic, how can we lose? And if I was that fly and I had a little voice, I'd say, why don't you ask Clement Attlee about that? Now, most people don't know who Clement Attlee is because he's not a household name, but Clement Attlee is the guy who beat Winston Churchill after World War II. And believe me, everyone in England felt that Churchill did a pretty good job getting them through World War II. When that war is over, they threw him out. So it can happen to anyone. And the conventional wisdom that, we did a good job, therefore we will be rewarded, is just not there. And the problem with politics, one of them is these people, these experts in politics who love the game so much they're actually in the prime minister's office or the leader of the opposition's office. They subscribe to conventional wisdom. Another piece of conventional wisdom is if you're in a minority government and you call an election, for the first 4 days, people are going to be jumping up and down going, why did you call an election? Why did you call an election? But on the fourth day, an alarm is going to go off. And suddenly no one will ever talk about that again. And we'll start talking about the real issues. That's conventional wisdom. Well, it's conventional wisdom, but what if that doesn't happen? What if whether or not the election should have been called becomes a ballot box issue? And certainly for a lot of Canadians, I think it is right now.
It certainly seems to be, and it has been reflected in both the French language debates as well as the English language debate. Indeed, that's the attack line at the federal Liberal leader. But we have seen also how things can shift, how the narrative can just suddenly turn a corner. And we saw that as recently as yesterday and to today with regard to the happenings in Alberta. What do you see unfolding with the state of emergency, health emergency now being called by Premier Jason Kenney and Conservative leader Erin O'Toole's reaction to that?
It certainly couldn't have been welcome in the Erin O'Toole camp. And Erin O'Toole has the famous piece of video that is everywhere on social media, and it has been since the beginning of the campaign, but today more so, when he is saying that the federal government can learn a lot from the way the Conservative government in Alberta handled this pandemic, and they can learn a lot from Jason Kenney. And that's a really damning piece of tape. When I first saw the tape, I was so frustrated with it because one of the things that drives me insane in Canada is how the average citizen just does not know the difference between municipal powers, provincial powers, and federal powers, and also responsibility. What is a federal responsibility? What is a provincial responsibility? What is a municipal responsibility? So for Erin O'Toole to be saying the federal government should take lessons from a provincial government is ridiculous to begin with, because it's apples and oranges. But now that piece of tape is going to come back and haunt him, I think, because, the rest of the country wasn't open for business, and we didn't have premiers who stood up and said, gonna be the best summer ever, yeehaw, let's go. So the rest of the country did make sacrifices, and the rest of the country is in better shape as a result of it. So it's not a good situation for Erin O'Toole, and it's not good for Jason Kenney. But the irony is Jason Kenney is getting all sorts of criticism, and there's grumblings that there could be a mini revolt in caucus or even cabinet. But of course, those people aren't upset because he opened up too soon. They're upset because he's bringing in these masks and this new lockdown. And so, I wouldn't want to be Jason Kenney on a good day, but certainly not dealing with the pandemic, not with his caucus. No. That's a tightrope right there.
I can feel, I don't know if you can feel it, but the people that are watching right now, the UBCM crew that are watching our fireside chat, I can feel them doing this to so much of what you just said.
People, it's interesting. I mean, I know everyone listening works with municipalities. Some are mayors, some are councillors, some work in municipalities or what have you. But so I don't need to tell anyone what that, the whole pandemic thing was downloaded onto the municipalities to such a huge extent. I mean, federally, of course, it's big picture stuff. It's big picture stuff, and they got to get the vaccines in. They got to do all that. And then the province does their province thing. But at the end of the day, it was the municipalities who had to decide the soup and nuts, like whether or not they're going to allow like every restaurant in town to build a deck out to the yellow line of a road, and whether they're not going to, whether they're going to close the parks or whether they're going to let people on a swing set. I mean, they had so much coming at them from so many different areas. It's not funny. So sometimes the municipality does great work and the feds get the credit, and vice versa. It is infuriating, but
indeed. That is such a good point. And when you speak to the fact that the electorate, the Canadian, the voter, the voting populace is unaware of so much of that, and yet having a conversation with someone like you, because they're going to be like, I love Rick Mercer, I want to hear what he has to say. Politics aside, I just want to hear what he has to say, because that trusted piece, right? You have the innate ability to put simply and succinctly what so many Canadians are looking for. And there's a trust with you that I think is unique to you, honestly, Rick. I told you this
Well,
when we
that's
first connected. I mean, you are a hero to many because you're a straight shooter. You're going to say what you think. And
well, that's
so
very
I want to
that's
ask.
very very kind of you. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome because it's true. But I want to get the straight shooter's view on each of the main players in this federal campaign. So you've given us a little bit of Justin Trudeau, a little bit of Erin O'Toole. I want to get to Jagmeet Singh and Annamie Paul and even go to the block. And if down. But so give me your Rick Mercer on what we see at play here for the
Jagmeet
viewer.
Jagmeet Singh has the easiest job in the world, of course, because he can say anything. And again, he made a statement. It was either yesterday or today about the Alberta, the situation in Alberta. And Jagmeet Singh said, "Well, you know what I would have done, and what Justin Trudeau should have done. He should have declared a national state of emergency a long time ago." For a federal government to declare a national state of emergency without consulting with without the provincial governments involved, would be tantamount to declaring war on every province. Every province would go crazy. This again is a leader exploiting the fact that people don't understand. Only the province can do that, barring some catastrophic situation. So Jagmeet will say whatever he wants to say, and he's clearly good at that. He's a very telegenic guy. He's a very charismatic guy. He's adapted TikTok. I mean, even I don't know what the hell TikTok is. I see it every now and then, but apparently he's all over it.
Yes.
I mean, I guess that's good. I guess. I'm sure the next election they'll all be on the TikTok. I don't know, but he's got it easy. And actually, with Jagmeet Singh, my theory is, and I haven't heard anyone float this, is I think he's running to be Premier of Ontario, because I think if you're the leader of the NDP, you're not ever going to be in power, or at least not for the foreseeable future. You're not going to pull off what Bon Jacques did in Quebec. That was an anomaly, and he won all those seats, and that's not happening again. But the Premier of Ontario would not be a booby prize, and the NDP had been waiting to take power in Ontario for a very long time, but their leader is kind of just not making it happen, and she's been there for a very long time, and people are looking around, and a national figure like Jagmeet Singh, I think, could take it. So I think that's what he's ultimately running for, not running for to be Prime Minister of Canada. Annamie Paul, I was very excited when she won, because I didn't know anything about her, but I just thought her victory speech was phenomenal, and I loved the optics of a Black Jewish bald woman. I thought it was great, and I'm assuming she shaves her head. I'm assuming that's not a bald thing. I hope I'm not in trouble now. But I thought the optics was great, and obviously the Green Party imploding on themselves. It reminds me of a Newfoundland expression: "They rises up, they gets confused." It's like the Green Party, they just get their head up, and then they just turn the guns on each other.
No.
They rises up, they gets confused, and I'm astounded that she's constantly running in one of the safest Liberal seats in the country, in Toronto. How you make that work, I don't know. So, and she's not really a factor. Maxime Bernier is a factor, and he's pretty fascinating to watch in this election. O'Toole, I think, is going to win the prize for shocking people. I think people had very low expectations for O'Toole. And he came out of the gate with his, too tight T-shirt, having lost 30 pounds, and everyone went, "Huh." And he hasn't made any flubs. Part of the Liberal playbook is always, well, we just sit back and we wait until horrible secrets about the leader of the Conservative, they're revealed. Like, it'll come out that his children are in private school and party members are paying for it, or it'll come out that he's actually the citizen of another country and has criticized people for that in the past. And then all of their candidates will start doing things like peeing in cups, and then we'll just win because everyone will go, "They're a train wreck." Well, that's not happening this time. Erin O'Toole hasn't really put his foot in his mouth too much. He did with guns early on, and I thought, well, this is it. It's over. He's just lost the GTA. He's lost Vancouver. He's lost big urban areas, except he basically flip-flopped and it went away. So, he hasn't followed conventional wisdom and let his campaign implode. And Justin Trudeau, for the first time, I feel in my life watching him, is he looks spooked. And he's never been, and that's not a bad thing. He should be spooked, but I've never seen him look spooked before. I think it's not going his way, and I don't think he's used to things not going his way. And I'm guessing that's something that probably things have gone his way his entire life. And it'll be interesting to see what he does, but no one campaigns as good as Justin. He's very, very good at it.
He is indeed, and it's going to be interesting in these last days as we count down to Monday's federal election and how the more fringe parties might impact things. Lots of talk, as is the case late in a campaign, to splitting the vote. What's the Rick Mercer take on vote splitting?
I think Canadians have always, I think Canadians are smart enough in their ridings. They could look at that. And certainly there's lots of NDP supporters who in this country who have plugged their nose and voted Liberal in their life. And they have the reasons for it, and it's totally legitimate. And I've certainly voted for parties I don't like for reasons that I won't bother getting into, but they're totally legitimate. And, like the riding I'm in, the Conservatives have never, ever gotten a vote, never, ever gotten a look-see in this riding. It was Jack Layton's riding, for God's sakes, and now it's Liberal. But if I was a big NDPer in this riding, or if I was a big Conservative in this riding, I'd probably vote for the NDP to try to, muck with the Liberals, who I really don't like. It's okay. That's part of our system. I don't have a problem with that.
So where do you think the votes go for those who might be watching Jagmeet Singh on TikTok and voting for the first time, or First Nations, Indigenous, Métis, Inuit people who have not taken part in what felt too colonial, but now they are starting to see that their vote very much can make a difference, impacting voting moving forward? Because it has been, it has been an older person's playground for forever. And then in most recent years, it has really become that of, the young people who are like, I can't wait to vote because I need to save the climate.
And I watched that in my lifetime of covering politics, and it was so exciting because one of the conventional pieces of wisdom was, and for a long time it was true, is that they won't show up on voting day. And I can remember talking to elected members of parliament, and they would be so disdainful when we'd bring up the young people voting. They'd say, like, well, the problem is they sleep in on that day. And then they didn't. Trudeau did a masterful job getting those people out. But they're really angry about the fact that he didn't deliver on getting rid of first past the post. So I don't know where those people can go. And I know a number of young people that are Green Party supporters, and they don't care that the party is in disarray. It doesn't bother them. They're still voting for the planet. Right. That's as far as they're concerned. So I don't think you can harness. I think it's tricky harnessing that young people's vote, and I don't think anyone has a lock on it. That's for sure.
So sticking to the Green piece there sorry for that bad pun, speaking to the Green Party piece of this puzzle, as you said, a party not going to be taking power. However, was it just yesterday that former BC Green Party leader, Andrew Weaver, the professor, endorsing on, I believe, Justin Trudeau's social media with like that big selfie that he's been doing, to say that the federal Liberal platform on climate is actually the strongest of all of the parties. Does that move the meter at all?
You know what? I don't know, because I wouldn't presume to talk about British Columbia politics that closely for any audience, let alone an audience of people from British Columbia who follow it closer than I do, obviously, and it's in their bones. So I would like to know what the people listening think about that.
That's right. Okay, well, they can send it in our Q&A.
Move it or not. Yeah, I honestly don't know. It's certainly interesting, and I don't know whether that's the result of he actually believes that the Liberal Party plan is better on climate change, or is it part of this, infighting that's going on in the Green Party, which is, obviously in every corner of the country.
It is really. And what of the undecided voter here? Is it so noisy right now? Is it so much to figure out? Is it just going to be, tell the story about your mom.
Well, for starters, I want to say I've never understood undecided voters. I've never gotten it, and I've never the National did that. I understand people who don't know anything because they don't pay any attention. I get those people, and I understand they literally know nothing. But the National did a series of interviews with all the leaders, and they had these undecided voters, and these undecided voters were very articulate, knew all the issues, and knew all the platforms. And I was like, well, how do you get to this point and you're still undecided? I don't get it. But anyway, but my mother, is not a fan of Justin's, and she just doesn't like the cut of his jib. And my mother's pretty saucy. She also has other rules, like she won't vote for a doctor no matter what, because she was a nurse. So she's a bit of an odd duck. But anyway, she called me the other day and she said, well, I'm voting Liberal. I said, really? And she said, yeah, I can't believe that man's allowing people to go door to door, knocking on doors, not fully vaccinated. I mean, we're seniors. If a conservative comes to our door, I don't care who they are. If I know them, I'm not letting them over the step. And so that was the thing that changed her mind. Now, whether that changed other people's mind, I don't know. But I don't think she was an undecided voter. She was someone who, my guess is, and my parents never actually say how they vote, so I've only ever guessed in my life. My guess is she would normally vote Liberal, but my guess is she'd probably vote Conservative as well, because Newfoundland is one of those places where how far left or right the parties are at any given point have to do with the provincial leader. And, they flip sometimes. Sometimes, like in BC, the Liberal Party is the more conservative party and the Conservative Party is to the left of them. So my guess is they voted all over the map.
And going back to that door knocking in a pandemic, I mean, that there could be an RMR rant in that for sure.
Oh, yeah. Listen, in Newfoundland, I don't want to dwell on Newfoundland, but in Newfoundland, there was a provincial election not that long ago. Newfoundland handled the pandemic incredibly well. In many cases, we have an incredible geographic advantage because we're an island. There's only two ways in. But anyway, there was essentially no COVID. There was none. It was like nipped in the bud. Things were really getting back to normal. We had a new leader of the Liberal Party. They were the incumbent party. He called it an election. He was doing so well in the polls. People actually thought that they might sweep it, might win every seat, which has never happened in Newfoundland, happened in New Brunswick once. But everyone was just sitting back counting how big his majority was going to be. There was an outbreak during the campaign. The whole campaign was turned into a vote-in election anyway, a mail-in ballot election, and he barely hung on by his fingernails. I actually had a $20 bet that he was going to lose. So the Liberals federally should have looked at their cousins in Newfoundland and go, wow, things went a little sideways, and there was a cluster of COVID cases, and this guy who was going to win every seat almost lost. So calling an election during a pandemic is just dumb, especially when you have 2 years left. Also, fixed election dates was something that Stephen Harper brought in. And it was one of the things that he brought in that most people liked, because Canadians, they can't, this whole notion of calling elections 2 years in or whatever, it's completely ridiculous.
It certainly feels like that is a dominant conversation when people are discussing where they're at in terms of how they feel in a pandemic. I mean, again, we go back to the unprecedented times of this. And for those of us in British Columbia, this is round two of
Sure.
election cycle on top of what felt like 20 years of election cycle south of the border. Like, we're exhausted. Everybody's tired.
And you're allowed to be exhausted.
Yeah.
And when I went to vote in the advance poll, I voted the first day I was eligible. And, there was a big lineup outside of the polling station, which is normally not there, but it's because everyone's socially distancing. Everyone's got the mask on. And I kind of flashed back to the early days of the pandemic when, in order to get tested, you had to go line up for 3 hours outside of a hospital and before you could do anything or see anyone. And I thought, this isn't bad. I can see people pulling into the parking lot and going, no, I don't want any part of this. And then someone came up to me with a clipboard and they said, I'm not with Elections Canada, but I need your name and number. And my first instinct was, what the hell do you need my name and number for? But it was contact tracing. And then it went, oh, of course. But there's certain communities right across this country, that person waving the clipboard around going, oh, you're here for your secret ballot. Can I have your name and number? They might just go, oh, I forgot something in the car, and they might not come back. There's all sorts of unknown factors.
There are indeed. And speaking of which, I mean, the implementation of the vaccine card or proof of vaccination or vaccine passport, whatever we're going to call it, that it's not a nationally mandated, that it's kind of piecemeal happening.
Yeah.
Thoughts on that?
They're going to have to figure out a way to make it look like, well, when I go to France, I don't want something that says Newfoundland and Labrador, says I'm double vaxxed, because they don't know Newfoundland and Labrador, whether it's a hole in the ground. And they mightn't know British Columbia either, but Canada at least is known around the world. So I want a piece of paper or a card or a passport that has Canada on it. And I think everyone in Canada should have the same thing. I know that's super complicated, but we're still a federation, and it's in everyone's best interest that is what happens. Versus me being an Ontario resident with my Ontario card and, blah, blah, blah. So that absolutely has to happen. And I also think, the fact that there's any debate over the passports, never mind from a personal freedom point of view, if you're a Canadian and Canadians want to do trade with the world, if Canadians want to study around the world, if Canadians want to work around the world, or Canadians want to go on vacations around the world, they're going to need these bloody passports. So I think the discussion about whether or not it's infringing on our freedoms is fine and dandy, and you're free to stay in your cabin, in Digby Neck, live off the grid, like by all means. But if you ever want to go to an all-inclusive in Cuba, you're going to need this passport, and you're going to need to be double vaxxed.
And Lord knows we all need an all-inclusive in Cuba once we get into the rainier and colder season. Looking forward to being able to open up in a meaningful way without putting people at risk. I'm wondering, in your mind, in all of the experience that you've had in politics and in life, and clearly you're the keeper and historian of Canada, quite frankly, how do you think we will look back on this era?
Oh, wow. I can remember thinking, when I was a younger person, that the 60s were so fascinating. There was such turmoil in the 60s. There was such societal change in the 60s. And nothing could ever match that. And people, of course, who, were of a certain age in the 60s never let us forget how big the 60s were and how much change occurred. And I just thought, we'll never match it. And then in my lifetime, we saw the rise of Trump. We saw, serious climate change. We saw just recently Black Lives Matter. We've seen now a pandemic, a global pandemic. It's like the 60s anything that happened in the 60s seems quaint now compared to what we've gone through. It got to a point where I swear to God, if I woke up and turned on the news and it was like one of those movies where UFOs are now over Paris and Toronto and Washington and London, I'd be like, oh yeah, of course. It's hardly surprising. These are the times we live in. There was a point where nothing would have surprised me. Yeah. So how we look back at this, I have no idea. But, people have gone through pandemics before. You talk to former Prime Minister Paul Martin, who had polio. He can talk about how he was in the house with polio and, neighbors would bring food by for the family, but they wouldn't put it by the door. They put it about 200 feet away. No one was going near that house because, someone in there had polio. And I can remember hearing those stories and going, oh, what crazy times people lived through. Yeah. That could never happen. And we saw some pretty strange behavior brought forward by fear during the beginning of this pandemic. But by and large, I think we will think that Canadians did incredibly well. Incredibly, incredibly well. Our double vax numbers are phenomenal. They still got a long way to go. And for the most part, Canadians, they made personal sacrifices for the greater good. And that was a good thing to see.
It is very Canadian of us to do that. And it's interesting. I was listening to Dr. Theresa Tam earlier today, speaking of the vaccine numbers and how the percentages are excellent, but still leave us with that number of 7 million Canadians who are either under immunized or unimmunized, which puts our hospital system at risk. So those pieces of this are difficult and frustrating, I think, for many Canadians to say, come on, we're so close. But we're not immune to this social discourse, not just political, but social discourse. So are we naive? Do we think we are naive? Are we naive here in Canada to think that, we watched what happened in the US. That would never happen here?
Oh, we're always, this is a story of our lives, the Canadian lives, where we look down at our nose at the United States. The only time that got, that notion that we're so much better than them got shaken to our core was when Barack Obama first got elected, because he was so overwhelmingly popular in Canada. Suddenly, the United States seemed more progressive than us, and we didn't know what to do. And then when Trump, got reelected, it was like, oh, thank God, now we can go back to looking down our nose. But, the palatable anger that we see at these protests that aren't huge, granted, is no different than the palatable anger that we saw in the last 2 years in the United States. There's nothing that can happen in the United States that can't happen here. I mean, we're very different. There's no doubt about it, but we're not that different. And I've never, ever believed that. But certainly Canadians are of the view, I think many Canadians are of the view that, things that happen down there could never happen here.
No, we're far too polite.
We're far too polite. And we are polite. I mean, I think we did do a good, the message of doing your part for the greater good is more palatable in Canada, whereas in the United States, they're all more about like the individual's liberty, and they don't really care about the community at large. And there's much more of a libertarian streak in the United States. When you talk to some people who are libertarians, you go, well, what about stop signs? And they're like, what about them? We don't need them. And you're like, okay, well, you just lost me, But there's a bit more of that there, but it's here as well. There's no doubt about it.
I want to reiterate the technology that we all have at our fingertips. Listening to you, Rick, is just so great. Meeting like this one's for the people who are watching. Meeting your heroes can be scary because sometimes you might get disappointed. Not at all disappointed with you, my friend.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Well, I also worry about meeting my heroes, so much so. One of my big heroes was Rick Hansen, and I swear to God, I'm not saying that because I'm talking to a British Columbia audience. So much so, he was like on paper, he was like the perfect RMR guest. And I didn't have him on the show for like a couple of years. And my partner is the executive producer. It dawned on him one day. He said, "Why have you never had Rick Hansen on the show?" And I was just, because I did a project on him in school when I was a kid and all that stuff. And I was like worried. Because when I would have someone on the show, it was never a 10-minute interview. I usually spend a day or a day and a half with them. And I thought, oh, it would just break my heart if I spent time with Rick Hansen. And I was disappointed. And of course, he exceeded my expectations. Turned out to be one of the most fantastic people I've ever met. And it turned out to be one of the best RMR shoots ever, because it was in beautiful British Columbia. And I always say, and again, I'm not just sucking up, I always say, all parts of Canada are beautiful. Like, oh, I'm from Newfoundland. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. But then there's like an asterisk next to all claims of beauty. And the asterisk at the bottom goes, not including British Columbia, because British Columbia to me, it's like it's something that's being created on a green screen. It's so beautiful. And I don't know. I think it was one of the biggest, I don't know if culture shocks is the right word, but when I was in BC, because I grew up in a place where a tree, a beautiful, beautiful tree, can be 150 years old and it can come up to your waist in certain areas. Like, things don't grow that big. We're a rock in the North Atlantic. We don't have your climate. And when I saw those bloody trees in British Columbia, it was like one of the most shocking, beautiful things I've ever seen.
There's a reason why we love to hug them. We love our trees here in BC, and it literally is on our license plate, beautiful British Columbia. Let's get to some of our questions from our attendees. This one's from Ebony. What do you think is the role of comedy in politics these days? Where do we learn to laugh at ourselves? And how can we enjoy the comedic moments of our work without causing too much of a stir? Also, thank you for everything you've brought to Canadian media. And have you ever been to Souk?
I'll have to Google if I've been to Souk, because there's a lot of places I've been.
It's on Vancouver Island. It's near Victoria. Souk potholes, famously a spot that you would go and sit in icy cold pools. And
I never did the icy cold pools, and you're absolutely right. That was always on the list when we were on Vancouver Island. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And so no. What was the first part of the question? Oh, the
first
role
part.
of comedy.
What do you think the role of comedy is?
Satire was speaking truth to power, and I still think that that's an important thing that comedy can do. I think, there's always a role for comedy. I think, I never wanted to be perceived as doing something that I thought was important. At the end of the day, I wanted to show that people could sit back, relax, and have a laugh at it. I felt I was a comedian first and foremost. We had to do a comedy show first and foremost. In fact, at our show, if someone said, no, we should do it because it's important, people would like roll up pieces of paper and throw it at them. It's like, we're not doing important for importance sake. But there is a role for comedy. I sometimes worry about how effective comedy is. I could get in trouble for saying this, of course, in this day and age, because everyone has, their own channels that they can tune into and listen to comedians who are just basically espousing a point of view that is their own. So there's all these echo chambers. There's certain talk shows in the United States that suddenly came to life and had huge ratings when it came to attacking Donald Trump every night. And I enjoyed watching those as much as the next person. But I often wondered, is this moving the dial at all? Or is it just preaching to the choir? And if it's just preaching to the choir, that's kind of worrisome. That was one of the things that I loved about the Mercer report, is there were so many different elements. There were, a big part of it was traveling Canada and visiting an oyster fisherman or a logger in BC. That was a big part of the show. And people watched that show because they wanted to learn about different parts of Canada, and they wanted to imprint Canada on their kids, I think, and they watched as a family. But as a result, I didn't have a monoculture of people watching me. I didn't have just, NDP or just liberal or just conservative or just any of that. I had this wide swath of people. So when I would come on to do the rant, I knew they knew that if they didn't like what I was saying, they only had to wait a minute, 30 seconds, I'd be gone. But I felt like I was reaching a much broader audience than most shows could, because of that climate now where everyone just gets their news from a news source that they agree with. Everyone gets their opinion from an opinion source they agree with. It's worrisome, but I don't know how to change it.
Well, by continuing to be you, frankly, because just saying that matters, right? Like you do have the gravitas. You do have that rant that you just said. It's okay. We can disagree at the end of it. It's not going to last forever. I'm just letting you know these are my thoughts. It's what you were Twitter before Twitter was Twitter. So I got a bunch of other questions here, and this I promise you is not a bit, because our producers behind the scenes are going to see me disappear for a second, because I just noticed my laptop battery is flashing at me and I don't want to go anywhere.
I've done that. You forgot to plug in.
I did. I'm so sorry.
I have a note on my desk that says plug in. Oh, it's right there.
Microphone. Oh, yeah.
Okay, so ask the question, then you disappeared.
I'll go this far away. I'll be right back. This one is from Alton. He's a counselor in Sechelt, another of the most beautiful places on the planet, by the way. Do you think there's much hope of reversing the general public anger and agitation? Or do you think as a society, we're sliding down a slippery slope that we may not be able to climb back up again?
Wow, that's a very good question. And I worry very much. I mean, I don't believe that we're sliding down a slippery slope that we can't get out of. And I hope, even the idea of that is terrifying, of course, because God knows where that will lead. I would like to think that this anger, the anger that is occurring now, can be dealt with. This is what, it's kind of like what's happening in the United States as well. It's like the Trump people lost, but when a group of people loses and they feel powerless, people have to accommodate them to a certain extent and bring them back into the fold. I mean, the word Nazi is thrown around far too much in politics, and it should never be used in politics. But after World War II, the world reached out and helped Germany rebuild. And they were actual Nazis. They didn't go, we're just going to deplore you as a country forever, because they just knew that will just see history repeat itself once again. And now they're one of the most progressive democracies in the world. I just think we have to treat each other with more respect, and that's a two-way street. And that means I want to know why those people are so angry. And I'm not saying we change society to accommodate them, but again, if they're out there screaming and yelling about not wanting to be vaccinated, I can't help but think it's something else. Like it's something else that's going on.
We have to find a way to welcome them back in, is what I'm hearing you say. There has to be room.
I have a friend who's gone down this road, and they talk about, it's about freedom, my freedom, my freedom. And I think, I've known you your entire life. You've never ever gone on about freedom before. This is just not one of your things.
Yeah.
And you were all, and I just feel that it's all about something else. It's all about something else. And it could have to do with the fact that, he hasn't really had employment in 2 years, and he's not in a very good place right now. And I can't help but think that that's the problem. And so if we treat these people just with complete disrespect, then there's just going to be more of them, and they're just going to get angrier. I don't know the solution. I really don't know the solution. But, when you see people, it's like the people who voted Trump, and I never would have voted for Donald Trump. But when people just mock anyone who voted for him to such an extent, it's as vicious as anything they're doing. It's just in the other direction, and it's not going to lead us it's not going to help. So, I mean, I might be cliche, like, why can't we all just get along or treat each other with a bit more respect? But that's what I would like to see happen. When that guy was yelling, at Justin Trudeau, like, come at me. I mean, he's trying to pick a fight with the Prime Minister of Canada, who's surrounded by security. He's clearly unhinged. I wish Trudeau, I totally understand why he yelled back at him. And I would totally understand if he told him to F off. But I wish he hadn't have yelled back in the way he did. I wish that he tried to, I don't know. I don't want to say reach out, but I wish he tried to, make the situation calmer versus engaging at the same level.
This question is outstanding. It has gone up the leaderboard in popular here. This is David Wilkes, Mayor District of Sparwood and Director. He says, Justin Trudeau brings Jean Chrétien for help. Aaron O'Toole brings Brian Mulroney for help. Who does Rick Mercer bring to the table when he needs help?
Gosh, that's a weird question, or a good question, I guess. Well, thankfully, I don't have to parade around the country and get people to come up on stage with me. But, there's a lot of people I rely on. I've been very fortunate that I had, this TV show for 16 years professionally. And, my name was above the title. It's the Rick Mercer Show, starring Rick Mercer. But there has been a lot of people. Of course, it takes a village is just a joke when it comes to a project like that. And in my life, I've been very fortunate that, I have writers that I work with. Mm-hmm. And some of those writers I've worked with for 25 years. As a television creator, any consequence that I've ever done has been edited by the same person for over 25 years.
Wow.
My partner happens to be the producer I work with for over 25 years. So these are people that I rely on for help every single day under all circumstances. One of which is Greg Eckler, who I guess is a mutual friend of yours, and that he made the connection for you and I to have a brief chat before we did this. It takes a lot of people. So I'm fortunate that I have good work relationships with people. So there's a lot of people.
Here's one that I'm fascinated by. Ryan Zant, Councillor, Village of Pemberton, asks, what is the best way to help youth, young women, and minorities get involved with politics, do you think?
I asked the young girl across the street the other day, I said, or yesterday, I said, I know you're just back at school, but are you doing anything about the election? Have you been talking about it? She said, no, because of COVID. And I was like, sometimes COVID's being used as an excuse. And then another kid I asked on the street, and she said, oh no, my teacher said she doesn't follow politics because doesn't vote. And I was like, if you were my kid's teacher, I would tear your head off. That's I don't know, is that a fireable offense or something? Like, what? Who is saying that to children? There's nothing more exciting than getting involved in an election campaign. When I was 16, when I was young, I did it for my godfather, and he was a bit of an interesting local color, I guess we'd call him, in Newfoundland. He ran for the leadership of the Conservatives and the Liberals, and he ran as the Liberal and as a conservative, different times of my life. So I would go work on his campaign as a kid. I loved it. And then once I took leave of my senses when I was 17, 18 and volunteered for the NDP. And that too was really exciting. I made friendships that I still have to this day. And I love these ideas when kids have faux elections in schools. Love that. A lot of them really get into it. I'm an advocate of lowering the voting age to 16 because I think voting and getting involved in politics is it's a habit forming situation, and we have data that says if a kid turns 18 and there's an election happening, there's a greater chance that they'll go and vote at 18 because they want to be that adult and make that decision than if the way the timeline they're 21 when the first election happens. So maybe they're at university or college, or maybe they're working and they just don't, and they don't have that need to I want to feel like an adult, I want to take part. And then if they miss 21, and then the next one is when they're 25, suddenly we've lost a voter. So get them when they're young. And I know young people are inherently interested. This Elections Canada is not on setting up polls on campuses. That's devastating to me. But anyway, there's lots of ways to get young people involved. And I think it's not a hard sell. Despite teachers who say things to their kids like, oh, I don't follow politics and I don't vote. Despite it's actually not a hard sell. Politics can be exciting. Elections can certainly be exciting. And this goes back to civics. Clearly kids need to be taught every single year the difference between municipal, provincial, and federal, responsibility. But there should be election. If there's an election happening in Canada, it should be happening in every classroom at the same time.
Agreed. Can you believe that's been an hour?
No, this has been fantastic.
It has been fantastic. Final thoughts from you before we throw things back?
This has been a great conversation, Jody. Thank you very much. And I think I'm not going to tell anyone how I voted. That's irrelevant. Or how I bet, but I really think I'm going to lose a big bet on this election. By big, it's close to $20, not quite. So there's no crystal balls. I like to think that, I have a pretty good idea of what's going on, but my prediction early on already can't happen. So it's anyone's bet. It's going to be interesting. And for people obviously watching from British Columbia, it could very well be one of those elections that it's all about British Columbia. And I know in the past you hated, and rightly so, when
polls aren't closed.
Turn on the TV, the polls have closed, and we're now declaring a Liberal majority or a Conservative majority, whatever. This could be one of those elections where we're all watching British Columbia very, very closely into the wee hours.
Okay, so what was your gut? Did I ask you that already? I don't think I did.
No, but I'm not going to tell you that. Although gut is more important than ever now, because, people used to, in politics, oh, that girl, she's got a good gut instinct. That guy does. And then polling came along and made those people kind of not as important anymore because the science nerds had the polling, and the polling was good. The polling was good. Well, it's not good anymore. Now we got to go back to people who just have a gut feeling, and this is a big country. And there's not a lot of us, so it's hard to have a gut feeling of how the entire country is going to respond. But I'd go with someone's gut over some of the leading pollsters in Canada. What
an ideal place to put the pin. Thank you so much for doing this with me today. It's been an absolute honor to just get to pick your brain a little bit. Honestly, it has been an honor.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you to BC municipalities for having me back 25 years later.
Oh, man, that is so cool. Over to you, Craig Hodge.
Okay, and thank you to Jody and Rick for that thought-provoking and humorous conversation. And in appreciation of